Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, October 15th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. Joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran
Hey, everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Okay, guys, let's get into it and talk about what we've been doing over this past week. I'll get things started. Last night, I went to Warner Brothers Horror Made Here, a Festival of Fright, which is like probably the worst title for a Halloween horror festival. It's like a mouthful, but basically what Warner Brothers is doing, they see the success of Universal Studios Halloween Horror Nights and Not Scary Farm and all those events. And at the Warner Brothers studio lot, they do these studio tours. So they're like, why don't we put on our own event here on the studio tour lot? So basically this year, I think they actually started it last year, but last year it just had like the It House. This year they have a bunch of stuff. They have, well, first of all, this takes place on the Warner Brothers studio lot. So most of this takes place in this little town square area that has been seen in many movies. Probably most prominently Gilmore Girls, the TV series, but it's been around for 75 years, been seen in hundreds and hundreds of movies and hundreds of TV shows, and they basically have transformed this town square into a horror festival of sorts. There's a bunch of mazes. There's the It House on the one end of it. There is a Arkham Asylum is there. There's a Conjuring House. There's a church where you can go see an Exorcist screening, and there's a tram tour out into the Camp Crystal Lake. So I'll go briefly through all this. I'm gonna write a story for the site, which will probably go up till tomorrow, and you can read extensively about it. But it was fun. The It House has been done before. Ben, I think you covered it for the site last year, right?
Yeah, I made a video, and you can watch that on Slash Film's YouTube channel if you want to.
Yeah, I will link that in the show notes. So I won't get into that. That was fun. The new thing that I think a lot of people are interested in is Arkham Asylum, because this is the first time the DC universe has kind of appeared in these kind of horror events, and basically it brings you into Arkham Asylum where the Joker has taken over, and all the villains are on the loose, and you're basically going through the prison and encountering these people such as the Riddler, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Penguin. If you're a DC fan, it's a lot of fun. It's I would say more on the light side in terms of scares. So I think they probably know that some kids are probably going to go to this. But we did it twice, and it was a lot of fun. And they rotate out the villains throughout the night. So if you go to this event, maybe try it at the beginning of your trip and the end of your trip, and you might get some different experiences like we did.
Peter, I saw a picture on your Instagram of this, but can you tell? Does the Arkham Asylum section of this look like any particular version that we've seen before? Is it more designed to look like the version from the movies or a video game, or is it its own thing, or what?
I have not played the what is that video game series? The
Arkham Knight, Arkham City, Arkham.
Yeah, one of those things. I think it's based on that. It's more of a comic book-y kind of style. It's definitely not Nolan or even Zack Snyder. But it's cool. It is really cool, and you do kind of get to go up close to these iconic Batman villains. And it's a lot of fun. I got sprayed by Poison Ivy, and they do some creative stuff with it. But I do want to talk about the other things. The Conjuring universe is basically you go into the house of the famous paranormal investigators. What are their names? The
Warrens.
The Warrens, yes. And basically, you're given a tour of this house while things are going wrong. And this one's actually kind of interesting because it's instead of a normal maze where you're walking through on your own accord, you're being taken room by room by an actor, and it's kind of like you watch as scenes play out in front of you. and it's a lot of fun. And there was actually some of the one of the best scares I've ever seen at any of these haunted houses happens at the end of this maze. I thought was really fantastic. They're doing some interesting new things with this event, like since it's a new kind of haunted maze event. In the center of this town is a church. And they decided to make use of this church by showing The Exorcist forbidden screening. And what this basically is like a, 10-minute version of The Exorcist. It's like a highlight reel of The Exorcist. But they're screening it in this church. And there's even someone from the church warning, we shouldn't be screening this before the screening. And as the screening happens, it's kind of like this 4D experience while, the doors burst open at a moment, during the movie, and things happen and scare actors come out, and it's kind of when I was a kid, I went and saw It's Tough to Be a Bug. I'm not sure if any of you have experienced that at Disney parks. It's terrifying.
It's traumatizing. It's like the worst thing in those parks.
Yeah, and I've always been it would be great to have a horror movie version of this, based on a horror property. And this is basically that. It's not as good as that, obviously, but it's kind of a fun idea. Probably the best thing that I experienced was this thing called Nightmare on Camp Crystal Lake. So you board, tram tour vehicles, and they take you to this section of the Warner Brothers backlot, which is used as a kind of forest. It's used, as a lake in many, TV shows and movies, and I think most recently on Pretty Little Liars. But basically, they drop you off there, and you walk through the trails as you experience moments. As I think when you first start walking, there is a cabin, and all of a sudden a female camper runs out. She's bleeding and she's screaming and she's like, run as fast as you can, and out behind her comes Jason. So you're on this kind of story through Camp Crystal Lake, as it turns out it's not just Jason, but it's also Freddy is also on the loose. And it is cooler than most of the other haunted houses I've experienced, because you're not in these closed settings. You're actually experiencing things on this big epic, not epic, but a grand scale of this outdoor location. It feels like you're in a camp lake place. You end up going through these I guess camp cabins and stuff like that. And it's I think going to this event, going to this is worth going to this event alone. There are a bunch of I don't think this event is as scary as Halloween Horror Nights or Not Scary Farm. I think a lot of people might find it a little disappointing, but I think this is the beginning of something cool and something great. There's also a lot of cool photo ops here. This is something that I don't think the other haunted events really do. There was Pennywise was seen in the sewers, so you could take a photo in front of the sewer, and there's also Georgie with his raincoat and balloon in front of the sewer, and you could take a photo with them. And so there's a bunch of stuff like that. I really think that's a opportunity missed by a lot of Universal events. You go to these parks and you get to take pictures with the characters, and here you actually got to take pictures with Pennywise and stuff like that, which I know in this Instagram selfie culture is something I think that these other Universal is missing out on. But okay, so what else have I been up to? Over this weekend, LA experienced a huge rainstorm, which is unusual. We don't get rain that often. I woke up on Saturday morning and stepped out of bed into a puddle of water. I live in a relatively new built building in the last 10 years, and it turns out that my roof has sprung a leak, and I've been dealing with that all weekend. It's been a bunch of nonsense, and still haven't gotten to the bottom of it, and it sucks. But so I've been dealing with that. And the third thing I wanted to talk about, and I know I'm going long here, but I've been trying to get more serious about my health. As you know, I've been on a diet recently, and so I booked the doctor's appointment because I haven't really anytime I've gone to the doctor's, I think this is probably, I think a lot of people listening to this can probably relate. Anytime I go to the doctors is when something's wrong. I don't really take advantage of the general practice visits and stuff like that. I feel like that's, where you actually prevent things from happening. So I found out about this new thing called Forward. Have any of you guys heard about Forward?
No, not at all.
So basically Forward, it was started by someone that used to be like a high up guy in Google, and basically he saw that doctors' offices are, a horrible, flawed, just system. So he wanted to fix that system. He created this company called Forward, and basically what they do is they're a subscription service where you become a member, and you can go there. You have unlimited visits to that doctor's office. It's basically like the doctor's office of the future. It looks more like an Apple store than it does a doctor's office. So I went there for my what they call a baseline visit. And I think many of you, when you go to the doctors, usually, you have the doctor's assistant does all the stuff, and then the doctor comes in with a clipboard, and they ask you a few questions. They're writing things down, it's not even paying attention to you, and they're out of there within 5-10 minutes, right? And this doctor's office is basically trying to change that. My baseline visit was an hour and a half long, and I think I spent 75 minutes with the doctor himself going over, they put me through this huge body scan, and they went through my results. They took my blood, which, by the way, they use this all the stuff in this place is future tech. They use this infrared thing that looked like something out of Star Trek to point at my arm that you could see my blood vessels in real time, the blood pumping on my skin, so that they could pick, what nerve to tap into, or what vein to tap into. Just real futuristic stuff like that. They have one whole wall of this place is a screen, and while the doctor's doing his stuff, and he's asking you questions, he's asking me, what's my health, my family history with my health, with their health and stuff like that. And as I'm answering the questions, it's literally transcribing it on the wall. And, he doesn't have to write anything down. His focus is completely on the patients. But it was really cool. We went through and they draw blood, and within 10 minutes, the test results are on the wall. So he goes through your entire blood test. No need to come back for a follow-up visit. Send the blood to a lab. I got a flu shot. I don't know. It was just an amazing experience. It's it's not cheap. You pay for it every month. But and one of the other cool things, you walk out of this visit and you have all the test results on your iPhone through an app. You can, every time you go, they do the new results, and it will track it over time. They gave me a DNA test. I don't know. It's just very futuristic, very cool. It gets me excited about going to the doctor. And also, one of the other cool things about this, because you are a member, and because they're not a normal doctor's office who, gets paid by the insurance company every time you visit, what they do is in their app, you have a text message kind of chat set up between you and the doctor. It's not set up between you and an outsourced company. It's you going directly to the doctor. So if I ever have a problem, I had a, question over the weekend, I just, messaged them in the app, and within an hour I got a response, which is just kind of amazing. Anyway, so I highly recommend you check this out. I know it's only in a few locations in California. I think it's in Glendale, the OC, Century City, and it's started in San Francisco because of course, Silicon Valley. But you can check out more information at goforward.com. This is not an ad, by the way.
I just like to point out that this sounds like the beginning of a sci-fi movie where all of a sudden you stumble upon a clone of yourself somewhere in Los Angeles because this place is harvesting your bodily fluids and DNA and everything.
That would be scary. No, but I don't know. I want everybody out there should just look this up just to see what it looks like, because it's literally Oh, and the other cool thing was I showed up to my appointment a half an hour early thinking I was, get there early, and I'd probably be waiting in the waiting room. Within a minute of getting there, they had me in a scanner, I don't know, it's just so refreshing compared to normal doctor visits. I hate to be, geeking out about a general practice doctor's office, but I guess that's the world we live in today.
As someone who was in the hospital all last week with a pretty nasty infection, and I encountered doctors who were great and doctors who were miserable and had lots of wait times, this sounds really cool. Part of me, I think Brad summed it up. It sounds like a weird dystopian future thing, but at the same time, as someone who had a pretty miserable week last week, this sounds pretty cool.
It's total Black Mirror stuff. Like literally, you could film an episode of Black Mirror in this doctor's office, and it would be believable that like Hollywood, just created this for the show. But yes, Chris, what have you been up to?
Boy, that's a hard act to follow because I did not get blood taken out of my body, and I did not go to a studio. But I went to a thing called The Glow in Philadelphia, which is this. It's this little walk area where there's 5,000 jack-o'-lanterns just carved into various things, and it was very cool. I mean, it's sort of geared towards, I guess, families, which I'm not a big fan of families. Or
what you're saying, Chris, is you're not a fan of kids.
Yeah, I'm not a. There are a lot of kids there, and it was me and my wife, and I kept being like, let's get around these goddamn kids, just get out of the way. But when we weren't trying to push past children, it was very cool. It was, they have stuff in all sorts of shapes. They had like dinosaurs. It was very neat. It must have taken like a lot of work to put this together. I don't even know how they did it. And it was also very Philly centric. So there were a lot of Philly things. Like they had, the Philly Fanatic pumpkin, and they had like a Bradley Cooper pumpkin because he's from Philadelphia. So it was very strange. It was enjoyable. And, like most things in life, it costs way too much, but it was if you're looking for a laid back sort of thing. So here's the thing. I love Halloween. Halloween is my favorite holiday. I love everything having to do with it. My wife, while she likes Halloween, she does not like being scared. So, when we first started dating, I tried to take her to, like haunted hay rides and haunted attractions, and she would get terrified. And one year, the last year we did it, we went to this thing called, it was called like the Fright Factory. And it was literally a factory, and you're walking through and people jump out at you. And at one point, this guy jumped out, and my wife screamed so loud and for so long, they literally stopped the ride, and everyone broke character. And they were like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Like they were pulling off their rubber ghoul masks and being like, "Oh my God, is this woman okay?" They thought she was having like a mental breakdown. She was that scared of this stuff. So ever since then, when Halloween rolls around, I try to find very casual, fun things my wife and I do because I don't want her to have a heart attack. So if you're looking for something fun and laid back and people don't jump out at you and you're in the Philadelphia region, I think they have these in other states too. It's cool. It's called The Glow.
Very
Does
cool.
she like horror movies?
She does like horror movies. She can put up with them, I don't know, maybe it's because it's different because it's a screen thing, but if it's like people, like in real life, even though they're obviously not really monsters, she can't handle it. So we avoid that sort of thing.
But what if they are real monsters? That's the real fear here, Chris.
Well, I think she'd be okay with that. It's the fake monsters that bother her.
The whole time I was at the Warner Brothers event, I was thinking like Chris would love this. Like the whole thing, like was just totally up your alley.
Yeah, it sounds very cool. Unfortunately, I live in the dead zone. I don't have cool things like that near me.
Oh, I forgot to mention this. One of the cool things was they had like these Easter eggs, like just randomly every hour, like Carrie, drenched in blood would just run through the town square. Or like on the second floor of one of the shops, there was Audrey from Little House of Horrors. Like there was like, I don't know, that kind of stuff all over the place, which was just a lot of fun. Anyways, Ben, you last week you talked about half of your trip. Now this week you're going to talk about Ireland.
Yes, yeah. So last week I talked about going to Iceland, and this week I figured, I'd round it out and finish up the recap of my amazing vacation, where my wife and I we went to Ireland and Northern Ireland as well. So we stayed in Dublin briefly, and I got to visit some of the locations from Sing Street, the 2016 movie that is set there. I love that film, so it was really cool to actually see like the school where they filmed that, the exteriors, and the house where Rafina, the female lead, lives. So that was. Is
there any like memorabilia or like a sign?
No, nothing at all. Yeah, there's actually like just a sign on the school that was there, and it's actually on a street called Sing Street. So I mean, you can see sort of that stuff, but there's no like plaques or any official signs that anything happened. It's just sort of like in this smaller section of like sort of a quiet section of Dublin. So that was kind of cool. We tried to visit as many movie related and TV related places as we could, so that was one of the ones that we tracked down in Dublin. Moving along, we rented a car and basically drove around the entire country. So we went to Blarney Castle, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, kissing the Blarney Stone. It's sort of a classic touristy kind of thing to do. And I did that actually on my birthday. And I both of us went into that sort of expecting it to be kind of lame, as just like a typical touristy kind of thing. And there were a bunch of tourists there, but I have to say, Blarney Castle is like way cooler than people are giving it credit for, because it's not just you climb the steps of this old castle and kiss this arch stone or whatever it is. There's like, the grounds are super expansive. There is a poison garden there that you can walk around in. It has signs everywhere that are like, don't breathe in the flowers here, don't touch anything, don't eat anything. If you have children, keep them away from this area because everything in here is poison. There are caves that are like just off to the side underneath the main castle, and there are like secret passages and stuff that go back and forth between the castle and the caves. I think most of those have been blocked up. Like, you can't actually right now, as far as I know, walk through the caves and enter up into the castle, but you definitely could when the castle was fully functioning back in its heyday. So you get to walk around in the caves a little bit. There is a really cool circular tower that you can walk up inside, and it looks like the pit that Batman has to climb in The Dark Knight Rises, where you're down there looking straight up at this circular hole in the ground. You're like in a circular hole in the ground, basically, and it's all made of old ancient rock, and that was pretty cool. I'm just trying to hit the highlights here, so forgive me if I go long. I got a chance to go to Skellig Michael, which is the Irish island where they filmed the Star Wars movies, the most recent two, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. And my wife and I, Amy, we did a bunch of research into this beforehand, and we bought tickets online. Like, we reserved. You have to take a boat from this really small Irish town called Port McGee. It's like a 45-minute boat ride from there out to Skellig Michael. It's very isolated. It's out in the middle of nowhere in this off the Irish coast, and basically we reserved a ticket for an experience where you take the boat out there and you can actually land on the island and like walk around and go up the steps that Rey goes up and actually check out like the monasteries and stuff that are real, that are up there. And we were so excited to be able to do this, and we didn't hear anything until the morning that we got there. They were like, oh, if the weather is bad or something, we might not be able to take you guys out there, but we'll send you an email ahead of time and let you know. So we were sort of under the impression that like, maybe we'll be able to make it out there if the weather's good enough. And we were checking the weather constantly in the days leading up to this, and everything looked fine. It wasn't going to rain or anything, and we'd never got an email from anybody. So the next, the morning of the event, we got up and we stayed about an hour and away in an Airbnb, and we drove out there and like went to go pay for our tickets basically, and met the boat captain, and he was like, oh yeah, sorry, we can't take you guys out there today because the water was too choppy, I guess. So that was sort of a heartbreaking moment. But they were still offering boat tours where you basically just sail out there and sort of like stop the boat in the water, and you get to take pictures, and they sort of tell you a little bit of the history of the place and stuff like that. So we're like, I guess we're already here. We might as well do this. The only problem, guys, is that I threw up 3 times on this boat tour because the water was so choppy. I realized very quickly this is why they couldn't let us land there, because the water was so intense and like just, I mean, nauseating to a ridiculous degree. So, that's something that you're not going to see on my Instagram feed. You'll see a picture of Skellig Michael, which looked really cool because we were only like, a couple hundred feet away from it. But the part you're not going to see is how sick I got on the way out there. Yeah, it is. So for anybody who's considering going to this, just know that it's completely dependent on the weather, and it can get very intense. I was the 3rd person on our boat of probably 10 or 12 people to throw up on the boat. One guy just like sat in his seat on the back of the boat and threw up on the deck of the boat. Like he couldn't even make it over the edge of the boat. It was disgusting. But and then this other woman was throwing up over the edge. I, of course, as like a gentleman, made it over the edge of the boat when I was hurling over the place. But yeah, it was very intense. And there are islands out there that are not Skellig Michael. There's like one called Little Skellig that has this huge population of birds that are out there, and it's like the entire rock was moving. It was white, and it was because there were thousands and thousands of birds out there on it, flying around it. It was sort of a weird magical experience to be having while I was feeling so sick. So it was sort of like geographically a highlight, but like in terms of my actual enjoyment of the thing at the time, it was definitely a low light of the trip.
And those birds that are in endangered species, like, are what the porgs are based off, right? Like they had the CG. Or you think they're these other birds? Yeah,
it's slightly different birds. The I'm trying to remember the puffins, I think, are the ones that are actually they're native to Skellig Michael, the big island they actually use for filming, and the other island is called Little Skellig, and it's just really like right next to it, and a whole different species of bird just hangs out there for some reason. So, and then I'll blast through a couple other spots really quickly. Last week I talked about reading The Princess Bride, and in another spot of Ireland, there's a place called the Cliffs of Moher, and that's actually where they filmed the Cliffs of Insanity scenes in The Princess Bride, the movie. And that was really cool to go there, especially like while I was reading the book, basically. And it is incredible. I mean, it's just sheer cliff faces, and it's just plunging down and down into the water, and it's gorgeous and really an impressive sight to see. And then my wife Amy does these really incredibly detailed research dives into trips like these, where she makes itineraries to sort of maximize the amount of awesome things that we can see and do while we're on a trip. And she found out that we could stay in a castle, and we're like, yeah, we pretty much have to do that. So we stayed in this place called Ashford Castle, and it was incredible. It's like super, it's the nicest place that we will ever stay in our lives. And I mean, it was just incredible. You should look at some pictures of this place. We got to do this thing called a hawk walk, where you walk through across these expansive grounds of this castle, and you're wearing a glove, and there's a person out there who is like a guide, and it was like a private tour that we took, and they put I think it's called a Harris hawk is the name of the species, on your glove, and this thing just like flies away, and then you raise your arm and it comes flying back to you, and it eats little pieces of food out of your hand. And we just like walked around the grounds for an hour with these amazing hawks just flying off and on. It was a tremendous experience. I can't really put it into words. That was one of the coolest things I've ever done, I think, is just have these glorious creatures. Just we were walking around in open space, and then at a certain point they took us into the woods, and just to watch these hawks like dip and dive and dodge through all of the tree branches and stuff and still come to rest on your outstretched arm is pretty transformative of an experience. We also went to Belfast, which was in Northern Ireland. We got to go to the Titanic museums. I'm going to put together a full video for /film about that, so you can read it and watch that in the days and weeks to come. We also went to several Game of Thrones locations on the trip, and I do
have a question about the castle.
Yes.
So you said that was a cool place to stay. Like, is the interior updated in any way? Like, is it, or are you like, what are the bathrooms like? Staying in
it's
castle?
So nice. It's like a 5-star hotel kind of thing, but inside the exterior of a castle. And they have like a whole wing that's devoted to afternoon tea and like all of this. There's massive fireplaces everywhere, and the decor inside is just. It's like opulence of the highest order. It's so it's really ridiculous. Like we felt wildly uncomfortable being in there when we first walked in, because we're like, we are not super fancy people who stay in places like this. This is a totally foreign experience for us, but it's a testament to how amazing everything is there and the way that the staff treats everybody and stuff, that you start to feel comfortable very, very quickly. So it was hard to leave. We stayed there for a couple nights, and it was just, it was pretty amazing to be able to stay there. We saw a bunch of Game of Thrones locations on the trip, and I'm going to make another video about a couple of those, but one in particular was we got to go to the castle that served as the setting for Winterfell in season 1. And we got to do archery there and sit on their replica of the Iron Throne. And my wife got to wear like a vest that Bran Stark wore in the show. They like give you cloaks and fake swords and stuff to walk around like you're a person of the Night's Watch and all of this stuff. I mean, it was pretty awesome. So I have a ton of video footage from that. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Maybe I'll talk about it when I finally get together and get the footage together and edit it together into a video and finalize that. And maybe I'll talk about that in detail, because there's a lot to talk about. There's a ton of Game of Thrones locations right around that specific castle. So it was. So
it's kind of like how people go to New Zealand for like the Hobbiton stuff. Like there's a lot of like Game of Thrones tourist locations you can hit up. Yeah. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about some of those in that when it comes around to that. But I'll cede my time to the gentleman from Indiana at this point.
Brad, what's going on? I hear you're moving.
Well, yeah, it's definitely nothing anywhere near as exciting as everyone else is doing. I'm just taking all my shit and moving it to another place. It's really not that exciting.
And from what we know, you have lots of Blu-rays.
Lots of Blu-rays, probably way too many action figures, and yeah, it's just so tedious, and I hate moving every single time I do it. So yeah, it's not fun at all. I'm in the midst of packing my stuff, and it's happening throughout the week, and then I'll deal with the furniture after that. Like the only thing that I like about it is I look forward to like
The Purge.
Yes, I look forward to The Purge. No, I look forward to like getting my stuff arranged. It's after it's all I get out to the new place. Like it's kind of therapeutic. I just like arranging it in a new cool way and just getting everything situated. So I'm excited to get that finished and taken care of. So hopefully by this time next week I'll be all finished with that.
And I wasn't joking. The only thing I like about moving is like every time I move, I usually end up throwing out half of my shit.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
That's what I meant. Like, I didn't mean the movie, The Purge, but like the actual like.
I thought you were talking about like an actual purge. Like I'm looking forward to the time when we all are able to just murder each other on one night.
Okay, HC, what have you been up to?
I mean, I'm looking forward to that day. So. Oh no, I went to the Maryland Renaissance Festival this weekend for my friend's birthday, and it was my first RenFair experience, which was really cool. So if you're not familiar with Renaissance festivals, they're like annual festivals in which people dress up as in medieval clothing, and there's events and jousts and food and drink, and all in the spirit of celebrating this whimsical era that isn't really historically defined, just people kind of vaguely dress like things that look vaguely medieval, but it was a lot of fun.
I love when like people are cosplaying as like Doctor Who and yeah.
I was actually thinking like when I was there, I was like, I could have worn my Doctor Who outfit here, because I once dressed up as the 11th Doctor, of course, for Halloween a few years ago. I was like, I totally could have worn it here and been like right at home, because there are people who are dressed up as like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, a few anime cosplayers, I'm pretty sure, and one Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. So I was like, okay, yeah, you could just totally like. I think like some people who are just like goth just came as they were. it's definitely a safe space for everyone, which was really cool.
What's the coolest thing you saw or did there?
We went to a joust, which was really exciting. They had like little games where they threw little hoops up, and the knights had to ride on their horses and catch them. And eventually, at the end, they did a real joust in which they came at each other and did bodily harm. But no bodily harm was actually truly done. But it was a lot of fun because they have like a storyline going on. This festival in particular is supposed to take place in a fictional 16th century English village named the Revel Grove. And in this joust, it's 4 knights who are battling for their place, like on the king's like royal guard, and it's narrated by this princess, and it's really cool. And we had you sit in the corner and you're kind of allocated one of the knights to cheer for, and we were in the corner of this like German knight who was like a drunkard and kept like losing, which I'm pretty sure was like part of his character, but that was very frustrating. I'm just like stop drinking, dude. But it was a lot of fun. It was really cool. There's a lot of alcohol, which I'm pretty sure is like the majority of people's reasons to go there. And I had a meat pie, I think. It was basically just a calzone. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I bought myself a flower crown and realized I could use it in a potential Halloween costume for Sharp Objects, which made me very excited. So that was really cool. And I also posed in a picture that I put this on Instagram of me in one of the stalks, which is something I get really excited for some reason. I don't know why. Like whenever I see a stalk, I'm like, I have to pose with it. And I have one like for me like in Williamsburg, Virginia, in like that same kind of stock thing. So it was a lot of fun.
We should link that in the show notes. Jacob, what have you been reading this week?
Well, I spent the entire weekend at home doing nothing, unlike you fine people. So I get the chance to catch up on a lot of reading and watching. And I read in about 2 sittings Josh Malerman's Bird Box. It was recommended to me when I went on Twitter and asked for frightening books, good horror books to read this month. And this one caught my eye because it's also being made into a movie coming to Netflix later this year. And the premise is really frightening, and that is something, an unexplained something is happening on the planet where if you see it and no one knows what it is, you immediately go insane and cause harm to yourself and others. So the entire book is this post-apocalyptic story that flashes back between years after the event and time during the early days of the event. And whenever people go outside, they have to be blindfolded. And the basic structure of the book is the main character is trying to row a boat with her 2 4-year-old children downriver, blindfolded, because if she opens her eyes and sees whatever it is, she will go insane and kill her children or herself. And it flashes back between this river journey and her time in a house full of other survivors where the windows are boarded up and covered and things go very wrong for everybody. And it's 250 pages long. It's a fast read. It is terrifying. It is genuinely unsettling. It maybe ends a little weak. It never really finds a way to end in a satisfying way, but the journey to get there is so moody and frightening and claustrophobic because the entire thing is written from the point of view of characters who do not know what they're facing and can't even see most of the time. So reading it is just claustrophobic. Like you feel like you're trapped the entire time. And Malerman's prose, which is very simple and straightforward, really sells the idea of not knowing where you're going or how to get there, where a blindfolded journey to the house next door look for supplies is a day-long effort because you could take your blindfold off and see nothing and be fine, or you could take it off and see whatever it is and things go wrong. And this sounds a bit like The Happening meets A Quiet Place. That's kind of what it is. But it really is very good and very scary. And the film version, which is what was shot this year, being directed by Suzanne Bier, written by Eric Hessier, who wrote Arrival. It stars Sandra Bullock, Sarah Paulson, John Malkovich, Trevante Rhodes, Jackie Weaver. It's hitting Netflix on December 21st and premieres next month. So I really hope it's as good and as scary as the book is. Suzanne Bier isn't really known for horror. I know Andy Muschietti was going to direct this before she was, and I can't help but wonder if he was a better choice for it. But we'll see. I'm really excited to see what they do with this.
When does that movie come out?
December 21st on Netflix.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about what we've been watching. I watched the season finale of Better Call Saul. I've already said I love this show, and I love this season finale so much. I can't wait for more. I kind of hate that these seasons are so short, but maybe that's why they're so good. I also I watched the season premiere of Shark Tank. It's like their 10-year anniversary, I think. I'm a huge fan of this show, and it's a reality series where people come on and basically try to pitch the investors in their products and businesses, and it includes a whole cast of cool investors like Mark Cuban. I don't know. The show has become a little less interesting in recent years. I think it's becoming a little bit more reality TV in that they're picking more people with a interesting or sob story rather than interesting products and businesses. It's some 12-year-old girl who created a cookie business, and the cookies aren't anything anything different, versus like I feel like back in the day they used to have like some very interesting products that like seem to solve problems that are interesting, and seeing that kind of thing, or it could just be that like we've run through the great inventions that are gonna apply to like a show like this. But I don't know. I'm still watching it. I still like it, but I'm finding it.
I agree with you, Peter, because in this episode they had the guest star was the guy who pitched Ring, the security system doorbell company, to them like 5 years ago, and like watching the guy who made Ring, this now massive company, sit there and be judge all these entrepreneurs whose stuff wasn't even maybe 10% as impressive. It was, I agree, it's a little sad to see like maybe the bigger companies or bigger ideas aren't going to be on the show anymore. It has me worried too.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to talk about is I think a few months back I told you about this YouTuber named Simon Wilson. This is the guy that was his YouTube channel kind of got a lot of viral attention because he would sneak into places that he was not allowed, like Disneyland, or into like a big Vegas fight. He snuck his way up to like floor seats in like one of the biggest Vegas boxing fights. And Jacob, I think you even watched some of his stuff. He's from Europe. Recently, he did this challenge with a bunch of other YouTubers from London, where each of them started out with £1, and over the course of a week, they each documented it. Over the course of the week, they had to try to turn that £1 into the most amount of money they could possibly turn it into by the end of the week. So you could watch just, Simon's story, and every morning they would meet in like a park in London and kind of give each other an update of how they were doing. And it's interesting because Simon, I don't want to spoil this for anybody who wants to watch this. I'll link it in the show notes. But like, he goes to a casino and he bets his money and he grows it, and he comes up with these schemes of like, buying postcards from a touristy shop for like, 20 for £1, and then trying to go on the streets and seeing if he could sell each postcard for £1 each, stuff like that. Like, so it throughout the week, you're seeing how much these people can actually grow their money from £1 to, who knows, hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. But it was fun to watch, and I would highly recommend checking that out. Simon Wilson's YouTube page. I'll link it in the show notes. Jacob, what have you been watching?
Well, as I spent my weekend doing nothing, I watched a lot of movies, so I'll try to run through them a little quickly. I saw First Man in theaters, Damien Chazelle's new Neil Armstrong biopic, even though I don't think that's a quite accurate depiction or description of what the movie is. It uses Neil Armstrong as an avatar for why people would go to the moon, or more specifically, why people want to discover and voyage and find new places. And I thought the movie harrowing. I found it so exciting and so moving. And I've always been a sucker for good space travel stories. And First Man does two things that I found unique and special. First, it shoots all of the space scenes as if it was a horror story. The camera is so close and confined in these scenes where you really understand that these are people inside a tin can being rocketed through space and they have no reason to survive. And
those are my favorite scenes of that movie.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And my favorite beat in the movie, this comes relatively early, is during the Gemini 8 mission. Neil Armstrong and his pilot launch into orbit, discover immediately they're off course, and the first thing they do is pull up paper and start doing math. And it's like, it boils down to the idea that space program, at the end of the day, is a bunch of people in tin cans doing math and trying not to die. And that is so exciting. Also, the movie's really moving. I think Ryan Gosling's performance here is wonderful. It's internalized, it's not showy. And the way Neil Armstrong deals with grief and the way the moon landing, the moon mission becomes a metaphor for him trying to overcome past tragedy is something I found incredibly moving. And I don't want to say more about the end of the movie, but I found the final scenes on the moon to be overwhelming in how they made me feel. But we'll talk more about First Man, I think, in months ahead, because it's going to be a big Oscar movie.
I was going to say, Ben and Brad have also seen this movie. So let's hear what you guys thought about this. Let's start with Ben.
I wanted to love this movie, and I did not. I mean, I definitely came away from it with the same appreciation that you did, Jacob, in terms of like in terms of it making you sort of take a step back and look at how sort of wild and crazy just the idea of a space program is in general. But in terms of like the emotional impact, I didn't feel it in this movie. I think a lot of it had to do with the way that Damien Chazelle chose to frame the action. Everything in this film is so up close that I just found myself like desperately it felt claustrophobic in a way that I don't think necessarily worked for this story. But it sounds weird because it's a movie about a guy going to space, and that kind of is claustrophobic, but I can't, I guess in an emotional capacity, it's hard for me to verbalize why it didn't work for me that well. And I think Gosling's performance was like a little bit too blank for my taste, and he's a guy who can play blank with the best of them, and I just wish I had a little bit more from him.
You like don't feel like anything's going on internally. Like I don't feel like he's struggling to hold things in.
Oh, I disagree so much.
I totally disagree with that too. I disagree with both things Ben said. Actually, I feel like the way Chazelle shoots this movie is he shoots it exactly how he wants to present this story. It's not so much about the moon landing, the bigger picture thing. It's about Neil, and it's intimately shot, and it's close up, and it's claustrophobic because he wants you to feel like that experience as best you can in a movie theater, by having that point of view and feeling how loud and unstable space travel feels and how scary it all is. And then on top of that, the emotional side, I feel like Ryan Gosling's performance is so sheltered, and it's because it's a man who has cut himself off emotionally and isn't showing any of these feelings or anything he has because he's still traumatized by the death of his daughter. And in this sense, I think Ryan Gosling playing blank is totally intentional, and I think it makes the story that much more personal and emotional because you don't see his pain being expressed in an obvious manner, but you can see that he's hiding it. And I think that makes it all the more heartbreaking, and I think it makes that final moment in the movie during the moon landing that much more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate that's a read that people who like the movie are definitely coming away with. I've read a little bit about it since I've seen it, and I can certainly appreciate that it worked for you guys on that level. But I think I should specify that the way that Chazelle shoots the movie, especially inside the space capsules and stuff, that stuff I'm totally fine with it being claustrophobic because it's more experiential. But the problems that I have with it come when it's not inside a spaceship, when it's basically just a dialogue scene between him and Claire Foy, and everything is still pushed in that way to sort of drive up the intensity. And it just, I don't know, it's hard for me to fully explain. It must be just one of those things where it's just like it works for some people and it just did not work for me in this case. I don't know if anybody else had that experience when watching the movie, but I know
Chris did. Chris agrees with you very much, I believe.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle because the emotion in this does work for me, and that, again, without giving it away, that final scene on the moon, what Ryan Gosling does in that scene really got to me. That said, I agree with Ben that the 90% of this movie is like staring at Ryan Gosling's pores on his nose. It's like there's no reason like, again, I get it while, it's close up while they're in the capsules, like Ben is saying, that makes sense. But there are so many shots where he's just sitting at like his kitchen table with Claire Foy, and there's no reason for the camera to be as close as it is. It just really took me out of the movie. I didn't hate it. I it's just somewhere I wanted to like it more than I did, basically.
Yeah. I think it's a fine movie. I just didn't love it, and I based on how much I loved at least two of Damien Chazelle's previous movies, this is my least favorite of the ones I've seen. I still haven't seen the one about the park bench or something, his directorial debut. I still haven't seen that one, but in terms of Whiplash and La La Land, this is like a distant number 3 for me.
I'm in agreement there. But Jacob, what else have you been watching?
Yeah, my wife and I tore through a bunch of Shudder originals. Shudder, the horror streaming service, is $5 a month, and if you're a fan of horror movies, you should be subscribing because it's amazing. And they've been stocking up on like really cool originals recently, movies you can only watch there. One of them is Satan's Slaves, a movie from Joko Anwar. It was a big hit in Indonesia when it came out, I believe it was last year. And it's finally made its way to the United States via Shudder. And a few weeks ago on the Fantastic Fest podcast Peter and I did, we're talking about favorite films from this year's festival. Talking about how Indonesia was feeling like the country to watch for adventurous, exciting genre filmmaking. And Satan's Slaves really adds to that argument. It is like Hereditary, if Hereditary was fun. I say that as someone who loves Hereditary. But it is about a family under siege by powers they cannot understand or comprehend. Supernatural going on, spooky haunted house stuff, demons, some decent jump scares, a really solid sense of humor when it's required. It's a little over 100 minutes long, but it feels faster. It's one of the very few movies that it feels like it could have gone on longer. I was enjoying it so much. It is an absolute pleasure to watch. It's a great Halloween movie. It's spooky, it's scary, it's fun, it's chilling. If you watch one movie this month that's like streaming, readily available for streaming, it's like a good Halloween discovery of a new movie. It's new to most audiences. Satan's Slaves is a blast. I know Chris saw this too, right?
Yeah, I think I actually talked about it on the last mailbag, and yeah, it's or whatever this is called. What is this called?
Watercolor.
Watercolor. I should know that by now. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it is very much like Hereditary, but not as bleak, I guess I would say.
Speaking of Shudder originals, I rewatched a movie I saw at Fantastic Fest and enjoyed it there, and it played just as well at home for me, and that is the Argentinian film Terrified from director Demian Rugna. And I wrote about this on the site, so I won't go too long. But this is a relatively incoherent horror movie that leaves too many questions unanswered, but it's so scary and so effective in those scares. I had a great time with it. There's a jump scare in this movie that made my wife literally fall off the couch. Like she was sitting there and then she was no longer on the couch anymore after it happened. And if you're cool with the movie just being an exercise and finding ways to like freak you out, it's a ton of fun and it's really worth watching. I just don't think it has the character or story coherence I expect from this type of horror movie these days. I mean, ever since The Conjuring and the Warrens as characters, I feel like I want my modern spookathon haunted house movie to maybe have a little more emotional groundswell to it, and this doesn't have that as much as fun as it is. And speaking of Chris, you watched this too, right?
I did, yeah. And this movie is not it's not about anything. Like there's no real story. It's just a series of events. And like you, Jacob, I wish there was more to it, but at the same time, it's so effectively scary that I didn't mind so much. Like there's this part, I don't want to give stuff away, but there's this part involving a child sitting at a table that is so like unrelentingly creepy that it was like I watched it in the daylight and it was still just making me very unnerved. So if you're looking for like plot and good story, you're not going to get that from this movie. But if you're looking for like a really effective scare, it's definitely worth watching.
Another Shudder original I watched is Ruin Me, which is the least of the movies I watched in this stretch. It is about a group of people who go on a slasher movie-themed camping trip, kind of where you sign a waiver, go into the woods, and you get chased by people in masks while camping. But it turns out that there may be more to this, and there may be real killers in the loose. And it's fun up to a point, and then it kind of gets too convoluted in trying to play with the whole is it real or is it not aspect. It's a fun thing. It's a good midnight watch kind of thing. You can probably watch half drunk and enjoy. Not great, but if you're running out of things to watch on Shudder, this is another one I do recommend. Another pleasant surprise. A movie that I thought would be garbage. I thought I'd turn it off, but I did not. A movie called Delirium, a Blumhouse film that came out this year that I think it was released straight to VOD because it just kind of vanished. It is a Topher Grace vehicle. Topher Grace stars in this. Is a man released from a mental institution to his family home, a mansion. He's a really wealthy family, and he believes he may be going crazy. His house may be haunted. His brother, who has a very dark past, may or may not be in the house with him. And it's not great. It's junky. It is it's trashy B movie stuff. But Topher Grace is really good in it. Makes you wonder why isn't he leading more things? He's very effective. And the final act reveals some really nasty, ridiculous twists that I enjoyed a lot. As the movie gets darker and weirder and grosser, I dug it more. And it's on Netflix right now. And like I said, I put it on a whim, thought I'd turn it off, but I actually got pulled into it, and I really enjoyed it. And to put a cap on all these horror movies, I watched You've Got Mail, the 1998 rom-com from Nora Ephron. Yeah, it's really good, Peter. I remember watching it when I was younger because my mom loved this type of rom-com, and so I grew up watching this and Notting Hill and Runaway Bride and all these mid 90s to early 2000s breed of rom-com. And I feel like this is from this era of rom-coms up there with the 40s screwball rom-com for me in terms of a golden age that I wonder if we'll be able to replicate, because this movie is so sweet and funny and nice. And I really, really like it. And it made me feel good about myself and the world for 2 hours. And that's really what I want from a rom-com, which even modern rom-coms tend to be a bit more cynical, I think, whereas there's something really sweet and optimistic about You've Got Mail. As naive as it is about the internet, I feel like it is not naive about relationships. And I feel like the breakup scene between two characters where they break up because they realize they're not good for each other, but it's handled with such humor and characters understanding each other that it's one of my favorite breakup scenes in all of cinema. And it's this 1998 movie that I feel like nobody really talks about these days. Yeah. But you like this, right, Peter?
Yeah, and it's a remake of the Bookstore Around the Corner or whatever.
Shop
Around the Corner.
I almost wonder, do you think there's a way for Hollywood to remake this again in modern times? What would it be called? Swipe Left? I don't know. I don't know.
You've got catfished.
Yeah, exactly. No, I just love this film. It's one of my favorite romantic comedies. It's almost like, I don't know. My favorite romantic comedies are movies that take place in New York around Christmas. I don't know why. But what many people might not know, this is Kevin Feige's first movie. He worked as a assistant to Donner, the producer of this film, in that movie. So the what I'm saying is the Avengers started with You've Got Mail. So HT, I assume you also have a love for You've Got Mail?
Of course. I've seen it multiple times, and in addition to the many times that it shows up on cable, but I love You've Got Mail. I prefer it to Sleepless in Seattle in terms of the Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan movies. And it's so fun. I love Meg Ryan's very dated pixie cut. I love I love everything about it. Everything that Jacob was talking about.
Wait, okay, I got it, guys. It's not a remake, but it's an actual sequel, and his company has gone out of business because Amazon has put bookstores out of business. And I don't have the rest of it. Yeah, okay, there's probably nothing there. Chris, what have you been watching?
I watched two similar movies in presentation. I watched Unfriended Dark Web, and I finally saw Searching, the film that Ben has talked about extensively. Dark Web is good. I think I like the first one more, but this one it's very clever. It's a lot better than a film pointed at a computer screen should be. But Searching really is as good as Ben made it sound. Maybe even better. I think this is actually the first legitimately great, whatever you want to call it, screen life or computer screen movie, because this is the first of these films that I've seen, at least, that actually treats the medium like a movie. Like the Unfriended films, it's literally like they just set the camera up on a laptop screen and just film. And, there's no like close-ups, there's no camera movements, it's just a still shot basically, and stuff pops in the window when they need stuff to move. But with Searching, the camera actually like moves around the screen. Like it zooms in, it zooms out, it pans across stuff. And this is the first of these films that actually treats this cinematically. And I think that's what makes it stand above the rest. And it has a really good story. I mean, it's really, you really get hooked up in, the mystery, but beyond the mystery, it's just the way it's made. It makes it feel a lot more like, a quote unquote real movie than these other computer screen movies. So that really did live up to the hype.
And we could hear your dogs in the backround.
Yes, they're dancing around. Please ignore my dancing dogs.
They're so excited about Searching.
Yes.
Please ignore my dancing dogs. Sounds like a comedy album.
Okay, Ben, besides First Man, what have you been watching?
I rewatched the original Halloween for the first time since I was probably 15 or 16 years old, and I was surprised at how slow it was. I mean, there's not that many murders. I'm going to see the new one tonight, so I'll probably talk about that next week. But I had heard from Jacob and I think Chris as well that like the new Halloween is like pretty brutal and intense, and I just wanted to sort of refresh myself by watching the original. And I guess it's almost like watching the text of how slasher movies came to be. And like it's interesting, it's always interesting going back and watching something super influential in the beginning, because it feels, from a 2018 remove, like it's a movie that's not really doing much, but of course it's wildly influential. And I guess the appreciation I got from watching Halloween this time was more in form than particular storytelling, but because there's a lot of like the camera is the POV of Michael Myers and it follows people around. And I think like the original Black Christmas had done that before this movie, but this was one of the first ones to really, popularize that style, which has been done to death since then. But yeah, I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis, that's the thing that really stuck out to me, in addition to like the way that Carpenter plays with the form, is that she, while looking a little bit too old to play a high school student, I think, it just delivers a really solid performance. This was her first big movie, and it was like, oh yeah, this is an instant movie star, and she's been, kicking ass for 40 years. So that's pretty awesome.
And I mean, it's just science. We know that in the 70s, time moved much slower back then. So, I mean, no, but I mean, like really any movie from the 70s. I don't think there is a movie from the 70s that it has a fast pace to it. Like,
Jacob, there's a little movie called Star Wars.
But I don't think that's that fast. Like, how?
Actually, I'll offer an argument in favor of what Peter is saying, simply because when I was doing my student teaching, I had one of my students tell me why they liked the new Star Wars more, because when they tried to watch the old ones, they were like nothing happens. They're like, it's so slow.
He's on a farm for, I don't know. I love Star Wars, but like I can definitely see that. And like I've tried to show, one of my friends didn't watch movies in like the first like 15 years of her life, and I tried to show her Jaws a couple of years back, and that was just like so disappointing. It's just like, I don't know. It does have a pace to it that I feel like modern audiences aren't sadly used to. But
yeah, for sure.
Chris, Jacob, do you have any thoughts on the pacing issues of Halloween, or even movies from the 70s?
Yeah, I think it has to do with the fact that modern audiences are more used to the language of this kind of media. We gather information more quickly, we absorb it and understand it at a faster pace. So that's why you go back and watch movies from not just the 70s, but before that, where I feel like the storytelling is maybe a bit more spelled out because it has to be by necessity. Whereas our attention spans have grown shorter, but our capacity for taking information has grown much deeper. So I think that the faster pace has to do with that. And I think we have to train ourselves to slow down, to enjoy older cinema. I think we have to enjoy older anything. And I think that's why I've always if I had all the money in the world, all the power in the world, I'd have students take cultural literacy classes in school where they have to grapple with older things to understand this. But I don't have that power, and so I can't get mad about it. But I also think that's why.
Yet I also think probably with something like Halloween or even Jaws, so much of cinema has been influenced by those movies. So I feel like all the ideas that were very interesting in that time have been copied and played to death. Not to say that they're bad movies now, because they definitely are not bad movies, but I feel like if you had seen everything that had kind of spawned from those movies, it almost feels, a little bit more generic than probably it was. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah. That would definitely make sense, because I know people like fellow students in college who watched Casablanca for the first time and were like, it was cliche, and I was like, that's where the cliches started.
Yeah, exactly. That you said it better than I could. Brad, aside from First Man, what have you been watching?
Yeah, aside from First Man, I finally took the time to watch a show that I should have watched immediately when it came out, just because it was so obviously for me, but because it's peak TV and because of time, I just kept putting it off. And I binge watched both seasons of Big Mouth, the Netflix animated series created by Nick Kroll, in which he voices a ton of characters, including one of the main characters, along with John Mulaney and Jenny Slate. It's a definitely made for adults animated series about a group of young teenagers who are going through puberty and have to contend with all the raging hormones that come along with it. It is unflinchingly raunchy, but it is also, and it's such an accurate depiction of how confusing and overpowering like puberty can be when you're a teenager and you have just all of these like feelings coursing through you. And it is just, it hits all of the spots that like everyone is all too familiar with, all the embarrassing, shameful things that you did when you were a kid coming into your own. And it does it like accurately with the awkwardness, but it also does it in like an absurd way, because the kids have these hormone monsters who are the ones who are like driving their insane sexual cravings and behaviors. And it's just, it's such a dirty show, but it is hilarious. Like it's been a while since a show has made me laugh so hard and so consistently. And I'm so glad that I finally caught up with all of it. The second season only just recently came out, and I went through all of the episodes in about 3 days, and it's just it's so good. I love it.
HT, what have you been watching?
So I'm one of the few people who didn't see First Man. Actually, I'm the only person on this podcast who has not watched First Man yet, but I did see The Hate You Give, which is the sort of YA book. A film adaptation of the book that tackled Black Lives Matter, and it stars Amanda Stenberg as this girl, Star Carter, a high school student who goes to a more prestigious, like private school outside of her mostly black neighborhood, but then she one day witnesses the shooting of her childhood best friend and is kind of torn between these two worlds and is forced to reckon with her sort of strange place between both of them. And it's really powerful, really accessible approach to these issues of Black Lives Matter, racial injustice, police brutality. It kind of reminded me of the film from earlier this year, Blind Spotting, which starred Daveed Diggs, in the issues it tackled of like gentrification as well as racism, and that kind of strange balance that African Americans have to walk between like these two worlds that they live in. But it kind of felt like Blind Spotting on training wheels in a way. It was really powerful, but it still felt like a YA novel in a sense. Like it had a subplot with a drug lord played by Anthony Mackie, who was kind of just like a straight up villain this entire time, that made the entire story easier to wrap up. But the performances were great. Amanda Stenberg was amazing, as well as Issa Rae and Regina Hall, and who else was Russell Hornsby. So it's a really great film. I enjoyed it a lot. It definitely feels like kind of similar to how Love, Simon makes the story of the coming of age gay coming of age movie, like rom-com movie, accessible to larger audiences. The Hate U Give kind of feels similar in that sense, and that is taking this really larger, really complex issue and making it more accessible to mainstream audiences, which is not a bad thing. And then the next movie I watched was The Old Man and the Gun, which was supposed to be Robert Redford's sort of swan song before he retires, but that may not be the case anymore. Regardless, The Old Man and the Gun, which is directed by David Lowery, is a really great sort of homage and like tribute to Robert Redford. It feels, sometimes using the word meta feels a little bit, overused now, but it definitely felt meta in the sense that it was talking about this real life elderly bank robber's legacy and how he is kind of always drawn to this lifestyle and this way of living. And it was a really beautiful, sort of touching and calm in the sense, like allegory to Robert Redford's own career. So I really like it. I really love David Lowery's work. I remember watching A Ghost Story last year, and I didn't quite like it at first, but it really stuck with me and made an impact on me. And this, I think, The Old Man and the Gun kind of had the same sort of effect as well. I was really appreciated too that it was shot on film instead of digitally, which also felt like an apt tribute to Robert Redford as well.
Very cool. And you also finished up American Vandal Season 2?
Yeah, I took a while to get to that, but American Vandal Season 2 is great. I think we've all talked about it at some point on this podcast, but I'm just adding my 2 cents. I loved it. This show has no right to be as incisive and as smart about teen society and teen kind of social lives as it is. It definitely is just a really it transcends its sort of like SNL sketch premise to being one of the most authentic depictions of high school life that I've seen on TV that's fictionalized.
I still have not watched that series, but I know you guys highly recommend it, so I'm going to have to check it out one of these days. Let's move on to what we've been eating. Let's start with Brad and his adventures at Burger King.
I don't know if I would call it an adventure, but I got food the other day, and I saw that they came out with a new Halloween-themed drink. It's a scary black cherry flavored icy. So I tried it out, and it's really good.
What makes it scary?
It turns your mouth black.
Oh.
Yeah, like it's
so it scares other people.
Basically, yeah. So yeah, it definitely it is a dark, pitch black purple, and it definitely turns your mouth and lips a darker shade. But it's pretty tasty. It's definitely very sweet, as all ices are. But I enjoyed it.
Very cool. Jacob, before we started this podcast, you decided to get a quick snack, and that led to some fun. Tell us about it.
To set this up, I'm a big fan of spicy food. Spicy food very rarely phases me. So I'll be the kind of guy who eats the spiciest chicken, the spiciest chips, the spiciest hot sauces. So I didn't get a chance to have lunch before we sat down and record this podcast, so I thought, I'll open this bag of chips I got at the grocery store. This brand called Packy, which is kind of like if Doritos were good. Sort of an all-natural, more natural flavored Doritos. And this was Packy's Haunted Ghost Pepper Chips. And I thought, they don't literally mean ghost pepper. They're just trying to put on a show. They're trying to sell me spicy chips by saying the ghost pepper, but they're not. And it was only after I started eating them that I saw the label on the bag saying, "Please eat with gloves." And my mouth was very unhappy for the first half hour of this show.
How do you spell Packy? Because in New England, where I'm from, the word Packy is used as like about liquor stores. Like, go pick that up at the Packy.
I know it's Spanish word. I'm looking it up right now. It translates into The internet's not helping me out here, but it is a Spanish word.
Well, anyways, let's move on to what we've been playing. I'll start this off first, which I've been listening a lot to this podcast called Shezam. That's Shezam. I don't talk a lot about my obsession with magic on this podcast, but I do want to do a shout out for this podcast. It's run by two magicians, Carissa Hendricks and Kayla Drescher, and they're both female magicians in a world by male magicians, and it's a very insightful podcast because it really kind of sheds a light on a industry where females are the minority, that in an industry where, like, when, you know, they're at a magic thing, people come up to them and just assume that they are the magician's assistant. Talking about all these the experiences that come with also trying to learn magic from a female's perspective, because all magic is written from the male perspective of, like, you know, you have a suit jacket with, you know, pockets and whatever. And this isn't a podcast for magicians, really, but it's a podcast about magicians. And these two are just so smart. So it's one of those podcasts that really gets me to rethink how I think about things on a regular basis, and I think that's good. And they really are trying to kind of change. This might be a small community, but they're doing what they can to kind of change the way the magic community kind of thinks about not just female magicians, but female audiences. And I don't know. I would highly recommend it to anybody to check it out. You can listen to it on Apple iTunes. It's called Shezam. But Jacob, what have you been playing?
Well, I'm biding my time for Red Dead Redemption 2 later this month, which I expect will eat up my life for some time. On a related note, Peter, I'm going to want a week or two off. But in all seriousness, I started playing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild again. This is a game when I first bought my Nintendo Switch, I bought the new Zelda game, because everybody bought the new Zelda game. And I played it for a few hours and fell off of it, and then never got back to it. And I dove back in and started a new game, and now I'm further along than I was before. And this game's amazing. I mean, it won so many awards last year, I don't need to say much more. But the sense of scale, discovery, and mystery is incredible. It's everything a Zelda game pretended to be for decades, finally realized. The idea that the first Zelda games, all the way up through, you know, the ones from just a few years ago, were always sort of on a path. You always, the sense of adventure was an illusion, whereas the sense of adventure here in this open world so full of things genuine discovery, like riding your horse through an open field with a metal weapon, getting struck by lightning because you have a metal weapon out. Realizing you can light a field on fire and use the updraft to use your hang glider to go higher from a standing position. All these tiny little details that make the world feel real and make the sense of discovery not feel planned out. Everything you do feels organic in a way that feels genuinely magical, and it's like a little miracle of a game. And if you haven't played it yet and you have a Switch or even the Wii U, which was on originally, play this game. Don't do what I did and wait a year.
Jacob, I just bought this yesterday, and I have not played it yet, and I probably won't, actually, because I have so many videos that I need to make for Slash Film, but I will get around to this eventually, and just hearing you talk about it makes me really excited. I've heard that all the accolades that it's gotten, and I'm really stoked to jump into this one.
Oh, man. Ben, I'm going to send you a list of Switch games to buy, because it is the number of, like, indie games that are worth playing that are sort of hidden away on the store at this point is enormous. So you and I can have a conversation off this show about which you need to buy. Sweet. I'm excited for you. You're in for a treat. But I also tried Super Mario Party, which Brad talked about last week. And here's Mario Party in a nutshell. One person gets a star, which is the currency to win the game, and the new star generates 3 steps ahead of them, and they're still on their current roll, so they get that star too. And the next star generates 3 steps ahead of them, so they get that star too. So they get 3 stars in one turn, and the other player turns to me and apologizes and feels genuinely bad for ruining the game, even though it was not his fault, it was the game's. That is Mario Party in a nutshell, but I still can't wait to play it again. There's no game series I love to hate more than Mario Party.
It's so interesting because I feel like tabletop games have upped the game so much, and you'd think that, even though this is kind of a digital tabletop game, that they would learn from kind of the, lowering the randomness of things. Do you think they, why haven't they, Jacob?
I know that Mario Party 9 drastically changed the Mario Party structure to be a bit more fair, to be faster pace, and not have these bullshit moments. But the Mario Party fan base lashed out. They were very upset because I think part of the Mario Party fun is how unbalanced and unfair it is. If you play with against AI players, it's no fun at all. But with 4 players in a room, the game just seems to actively seek out and screw over somebody on the couch. It's part of the Mario Party experience.
There's no way to play Mario Party over the internet, is there?
Not that I know of, but I don't know why you would. You need to be in the room to see their shame and their anger.
I don't know. I was trying to in my head arrange a Mario Party /film Mario Party. I would like to hear that. Okay, we have reached the end of this podcast. Again, we've gone way over our time limit. So you can find all of us at /film.com. You can find this podcast, /film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to Peter at /film.com and leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention the email on the air. Please go rate and read this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter, do you know what time it is?
I forget every time.
Well, last week I did say, I was like, no one has written in about this book that Jacob keeps on removing, and we actually did get a bunch of people, overwhelmingly positive response. So people want to hear this. People want the book.
For anyone who has not listened to this show before, I'll now read from the gargantuan book of Insult, Offense, and Effrontery by Louis A. Safian. I open to a random page in the section Dumbbells. Hey, Brad, you said if it hadn't been for Thomas Edison, we'd all be watching TV by candlelight.
Okay.
Ben is too scared to get married. Every time he's about to, some insurance man asks him to take out life insurance.
Wait, that's just...
What does that even mean?
I don't know. That just seems kind of sexist.
What's going on?
Right? Am I wrong?
I don't know what it means. I'm just reading from the top of the page.
It seems like it's saying that the wife or the potential wife is a money grubbing, and just wants to kill him, right?
Presumably.
That's the joke,
ball
Peter.
And chain.
Peter, please, we have a lot of insults to get through here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Peter, the first time you heard about the Boston Tea Party, you asked who the caterer was.
I mean, that's true, but...
HT can't find a thing to buy in antique shops. She claims you're not making antiques nowadays like they used to.
Oh.
All right, and Chris, one time a beggar asked you, can you give me a quarter for a sandwich? And you said, let's see the sandwich.
Man.
Wait. Oh, okay, I get it.
See, because,
Yeah.
Beggar
Right.
is selling the sandwich.
Right.
Yeah.
And this joke exists in a world where sandwiches cost a quarter.
What year was this book written in?
I feel like we've discussed this before.
Yeah, it was 82 or something. I don't know. I could be wrong about that.
2017.
Copyright. This is the third printing. 1990, 2000, and 2014.
It's a hot seller.
Wow.
What world do we live in that a book like that has 3 printings?
The best world.
You have to ask, Peter.